The honourable member from Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, more bad news from experts. Last week, economists at National Bank released an analysis that said, quote, GDP per capita has fallen by about 4% cumulatively since 2022, which is unprecedented outside a recession. This is a made-in-Canada per person per capita GDP recession caused by a government that's hiked taxes on everything, energy, housing, banks, investment, that's driving out investment and making Canadians poorer. When will the government admit its mistake and reverse course on tax hikes that are driving out investment like they reversed course on so many other issues?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, if the Conservatives would like to make comparisons with the United States, I have one for them. Canada ran a deficit of just 1.1% of GDP in 2023, Mr. Speaker. That's compared to a 6.3% of GDP deficit in the United States of America, Mr. Speaker. We have made sure to be responsible with our balance sheet, and we are doing it while supporting vulnerable Canadians, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives' hidden agenda is to cut programs that Canadians rely on.
The Conservatives are laughing like hyenas.
From Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, I'll quote another expert relative to Canada's position with the United States. The Governor of the Bank of Canada, who last week said, quote, foreign capital, even some Canadian capital, is going to the United States because they can get faster regulatory approvals, end quote. Yeah. 2 years ago in Washington, the finance minister in her speech said, quote, Canada must and will show similar generosity in fast-tracking, for example, the energy and mining projects our allies need to heat their homes and to manufacture electric vehicles, end quote. Simple question. Can the government tell us which mining and energy projects they have fast-tracked since the speech in Washington?
Not one.
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, I know that member to be an honourable.
I'm going to ask the Honourable Member.
They're going to tell him to get his security clearance or something stupid.
To not take the floor unless recognized by the Chair. The Honourable Member. The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons, from the top.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know that member to be someone who cares about Canada's standing in the world and who I thought cared about Canada's national security as well. But what I find perplexing and what I think must be difficult for him to understand is why is it that the leader of the official opposition is refusing to get a security clearance? Why is it that he would rather ignore the threats to What is it that he's trying to hide, or what is it that he doesn't want to know? The NCCOP reported that a conservative leadership campaign was under threat by foreign actors. Is that something he doesn't want to know about?
Called it. I fucking called it.
After 9 years and 3 U.S. presidents, the NDP. This NDP Liberal Prime Minister has failed to get a deal with the Americans on softwood lumber, while our previous Conservative government got it done within 80 days. 2 more mills in BC are closing because of this Prime Minister's incompetence.
Yes, sir.
Wayne and Marie Harder have seen their logging businesses in Fort St. John destroyed by these NDP Liberals. I asked Wayne yesterday, who would you fire in this NDP Liberal government? Wayne's answer, all of them. Will the Prime Minister do the right thing for forestry families and call an election today?
There you go. Way to represent PG, my guy.
I'm going to ask once again the colleagues at the end, particularly the member from New Westminster, Burnaby, and Timmins St. James, Bay James, to please not take the floor unless recognized by the Speaker. The Honourable Minister for International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, I want to say to forestry industry workers and those in the sector how important they are to Canada's economy, and indeed how important they are to building affordable homes in this country. I know that we continue to work very hard and we have said that getting a deal is indeed the best way to go. But I think what Canadians want to know is why it is that on this side of the House, when we renegotiated NAFTA, on this side of the House, when we stood up to defend tariffs against steel.
Bro, even her poppy's made in China.
We are always standing up for workers. What they are doing on the other side of the House.
Look it up. That's not even a real poppy. It's made in China.
The honourable member from Miramichi, Grand Lake.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost to Canada's economy. While the Prime Minister dismissed his failure on softwood lumber as a small issue, the U.S. slapped a 14.5% tariff on Canada. This negatively impacts the 24,000 New Brunswick forestry workers. The Prime Minister has failed with 3 straight U.S. presidents, while Prime Minister Harper got a deal in just 80 days. When will the Prime Minister finally stand up for New Brunswick forestry workers?
Yeah. Bunch of suits and ties making rules for everyone else.
And energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We on this side of the House have been working very hard in the interests of forestry workers and forestry companies here in Canada. We are working very hard to progress negotiations with the Americans. We are working very hard on value-added forestry. It is something that we are committed to continuing to do, including working with Irving Forest Products in New Brunswick. I would say, though, that on this side of the House, we are working very hard in the best interests of Canadians. We would expect elected officials across the board to be doing that, and Canadians are asking why the Leader of the Opposition will not get his security clearance.
Exactly. Because it's a gag order. Let's move on.
The honourable member from Prince Albert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost. Just weeks after the U.S. hit Canada with a 14.5% tariff on softwood lumber, this Prime Minister dismissed its failures and the impact on Canadian workers and the impact of our forestry sector as small issues. Since the PM's comments in New York City, 2 sawmills in BC have closed, putting over 500 workers out of work. Canadian producers have paid $9 billion in tariffs to the U.S., from softwood lumber to Buy America. Why has this Prime Minister repeatedly backed down to the U.S.?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government always stands up for Canadian workers, and it always stands up for Canadian industry.
You're cutting 112,000 jobs because you're cap on emissions.
Well, the Conservative Party of Canada said to capitulate. When it came to supporting our steel and aluminum workers, we stood against those tariffs. We hit back hard. What did the other side say, Mr. Speaker? The Conservative Party of Canada said capitulate. When it comes to standing up for Canada's national security, we will always do that. But what about the Conservative Party of Canada? Mr. Speaker, their leader won't even get a security clearance to know what's really going on. What is it he's trying to hide? Thank you, Mr.
Speaker.
The honourable member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Canadian GDP has declined in last quarters. This means Canadians are getting poorer, their quality of life is declining dramatically, and the story is exactly the opposite in the U.S., where there's 2.8% GDP growth. Canadians are facing a recession caused by the Prime Minister's increases in carbon tax, housing tax, and capital gains tax. I know it's
simple, guys.
To understand
in order to think like a liberal,
never been in need himself.
You got to cross your eyes,
compassion by eliminating
pucker your butthole, and drop your IQ by half. And if you do those steps in that order,
enjoyed record investments. Take Honda, for example.
You could probably anticipate what their replies are going to be.
$19 billion Honda has invested. And the largest investment in BHP's history also, $22 billion in Saskatchewan. Record investments are being made in Canadian companies. Mr. Speaker, Canada is a winner in this century's economy, and we will continue working for Canadians. The honourable member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, how many jobs are Canadians losing because of the quadrupling of the carbon tax?
Over 112,000 jobs from the oil and gas sector.
Capital gains tax increase as
cap
well.
In the emissions.
Where's the gain, Mr. Speaker? And what we've learned through Statistics Canada is that the income of Canadian households has declined while it's on the increase in the U.S. In Canada, people are having to pay through their teeth. The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Let's talk about investment in my colleague's riding. Affordable housing units are being built as we speak and the funding for that was questioned by the Conservative leader because he wants to cut back on those deals with the provinces. Would he ask the Conservative leader who's sitting just 4 seats over for him if he could get his security clearance so that he can protect all Conservative members against foreign interference?
That's all they got.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Tonight, in the presidential elections, Americans will choose who gets to reopen the North American Free Trade Deal in 2026. Our most important free trade agreement is at risk of being renegotiated. Trump has promised to do that, and Harris voted against CUSMA. That's why it's dangerous to let 2 senators, Peter Boehm and Peter Harder, block C-282. They want to overturn the vote of elected officials to put supply management back on the bargaining table as early as 2026. It's the Prime Minister who appointed them. Will he finally ask them to pass C-282 so it's enforced before any renegotiation? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to remind our Bloc colleagues that senators are independent. What he's saying is that the Bloc doesn't have the power to protect supply management. The only government, the only party, the only group of members who has the will and the desire and the ability to protect supply management is a Liberal government, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. The Prime Minister knows that if C-282 isn't passed, the Americans could put supply management back on the bargaining table as early as 2026. He also knows it won't be him doing the bargaining, it'll be the Conservative leader. If he doesn't act to put C-282 ahead of any negotiation, he's putting our agriculture in the hands of the Conservatives, the same Conservatives who conceded supply management in agreements with Europe and Asia.
I don't think this guy's wearing a poppy.
Will the Prime Minister intervene, or has he already done so silently? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
She's also not wearing a poppy.
I can assure you that with our Prime Minister, the Minister of International Trade, the Minister of Agriculture, and myself and many of our colleagues, we are talking to senators and we are asking them to get that bill back here quickly. But any legislation can be amended. The best way to protect farmers in Quebec and all across Canada is to ensure that we keep a Liberal government in office for a long time to come. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. The last answer to my last question was yes, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to interrupt the member. I would ask members, please, to allow the member who has the floor to ask his question so that everyone here, including the Speaker,
at least he's not muting the microphone.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. From the top, please. It seems that the answer to my last question was yes, Mr. Speaker. No one in this House should tolerate 2 senators overturning our democratic choice to protect supply management. Message to Misters Beam and Harder. If you want to sacrifice supply management, then run for office. Face the voters for once instead of cashing checks for life in the Senate. Come and present your ideas to farmers in Berthier-Masquinongé. Come and face me. The Liberals are looking for candidates. Will the Prime Minister finally tell them to put their faces on election signs or mind their own business?
Holy smokes.
The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. The worst way, Mr. Speaker, to defend supply management is to align with the Conservative Party and vote along with them. They're the ones who pose the greatest risk, the greatest threat to supply management. We're the ones who stood up and defended it against the U.S. And unfortunately, what the Bloc is doing is getting in cahoots with the Conservatives.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Liberal government and 3 American presidents, we still don't have a softwood lumber agreement with the United States.
The only softwood is Trudeau.
The previous Conservative Prime Minister got a solution at 90 days after being elected. The incompetence and lack of leadership from this Prime Minister means we don't have a deal. 3 sawmills have filmed recently in Quebec, including one in my riding. 100 workers have been let go. Why are the Liberals still abandoning forestry workers.
Then I had
the Honourable Minister of Innovation. Mr. Speaker, I have a lot of respect for my colleague, and he knows that we've always stood up for the forestry sector and its workers. But the real question, Mr. Speaker, that Canadians are asking today, the real question they're asking is, why is the Conservative leader not getting his security clearance? Why, Mr. Speaker? What is he hiding from Canadians, Mr. Speaker? That's the real question of the day. That's the elephant in the room, Mr. Speaker. The Conservative leader needs to get the security clearance. He'll get the briefings then, and then he'll be able to do his work, because that's what Canadians expect from a leader. They expect
the only leader that likes to be gagged is Trudeau and Jagmeet.
The honourable member from the Nanaimo leader.
Not Pierre.
Mr. Speaker, women veterans will be attending Remembrance Day services this week. Despite their courage and dedication, many of them will be asked if the medals they are wearing belong to their husbands or sons. Women veterans and their loved ones have sacrificed.
I remember she brought up this issue last year.
They cannot be made invisible. Will the minister make sure the organizers of the National Remembrance Day ceremony include women veterans, giving them the respect they deserve?
Then I had
the Honourable Minister of Veterans Affairs.
Why is that being brought up in the House?
Today of Veterans Week, I first of all want to take a moment to thank all the men and women that served in the Canadian Armed Forces and continue to serve with bravery. We owe them a debt of gratitude.
Dude, I used to get the same haircut.
As we attend Remembrance Day,
my mom would put a bowl over my head.
All through Canada, we certainly want to make
But they put a bowl on her face.
To really thank the veterans that have served. I also encourage them to attend Legions and also many commemorative services that will take place all over Canada to thank both men and women that have served in the Canadian Armed Forces. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from London Fanshawe.
For 17 years, the Office of the Veteran Ombuds has been shining a light on the neglect of veterans. We have a sacred obligation to care for those who served, but successive Liberal and Conservative governments have ignored their reports and recommendations. Veterans need action, and we need to empower the Ombuds by giving them the power to compel documents and issue binding recommendations. When will the Liberals make the necessary changes to create a truly independent Ombuds so she can be the champion veterans deserve?
The Honourable Minister for Veterans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the services that we've provided to veterans across this country, since 2016, our government has invested more than $11.5 billion in additional services and support to help our veterans and their families. Unlike the previous Conservative government, Mr. Speaker, we have acted. The previous Conservative government closed Veterans Affairs offices across this country. And the first thing that we did, we reopened all 9 offices, plus we opened an additional one. They also slashed the public service by 1,000 people, Mr. Speaker, public servants that provided direct supports to veterans. We will absolutely always be there for veterans and their families, Mr. Speaker.
Bravo.
Then
the Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Mr. Speaker, our government has an ambitious plan when it comes to housing. Fighting homelessness, making home buying more accessible with the first home.
An ambitious plan after 9 years.
Putting federal land on the market for housing and supporting co-ops.
They failed over 9 years, but don't worry, folks. They're going to fix it now.
Measures will increase access to housing around the country and increase housing stock across the country.
No, yeah, we trust you.
Honourable Minister of Economic Development for Quebec. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Housing Accelerator Fund is going to help to build thousands of social and affordable housing units. Even Conservative MPs know it, and they've written to the Housing Minister to ask to access that program in their own ridings. The irresponsible plan from the Conservative leader to cut investments is going to endanger 8,000 accessible housing units in Quebec, Mr. Speaker. We can't trust a leader who's offering just cuts and slogans, but especially...
So how is she saying
security clearance
that Conservatives support their housing plan, but simultaneously saying Conservatives are going to cut their housing plan?